Hello, I'm Kaylin Clemens, VP of Talent Engagement at From Day One, our forum on corporate values. Welcome to today's webinar. We're excited about this topic, looking at how companies can support perseverance as well as achievement among their employees. Before we get started today, I want to share something special we have for today's attendees. One of our monthly virtual conferences is coming up on Wednesday, April 6th, and it's titled Managing the Human Impact of Digital Transformation. This event is going to be especially valuable for our employers who are transitioning to new digital tools and evaluating varied and influential effects of this change on employees. Thanks to our partners, including today's sponsor, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for those who have joined today's webinar. That would be you. I'm putting the link in the chat right now. You'll want to take advantage of this one. The regular price for our conference tickets is $149. And this link will give you free VIP ticket for the whole day's events and activities. Today, we'll be exploring the topic, how managers can acknowledge both accomplishments and challenges. Companies often recognize workers for their accomplishments, but they often don't have the same acknowledgement for their challenges that employees face, like doing more with less, selling into market headwinds, or facing intense burdens in their family lives. What can employers do to be more forthright in recognizing issues like these, while still expecting high performance? Our sponsor today is Achievers. I'll tell you a bit about them. Achievers' employee voice and recognition solution brings your organization's values and strategy to life. Activate employee participation and fuel a culture of performance and experience data-driven business results. Now, a few logistical items. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event. So you can look out for an email in 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from both the Society of Human Resources Management, SHRM, and HR Certification Institute, HRCI. Look out for a written account of the conversation on our website at fromday1.co. Around the 45-minute mark into the webinar, we will have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Emily McCrae Ruiz Esparza. Emily is a freelance reporter based in Richmond, Virginia, who writes about workplace culture and policies, hiring, DEI, and issues faced by women. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, Fast Company, and Food Technology, among others, and has been syndicated by MSN and The Motley Fool. So with that said, over to you, Emily.
Thank you very much, Kaylin, and looking forward to having this conversation with everybody here today. Mel, Stephen, Stanley, and Kelly, Stephen, Mel, Kelly, and Amy. Looking at an old list, my apologies. Really happy to have everybody here. I want to get started by having all of our panelists briefly introduce themselves and give our audience a little bit of a sense of what you do at your companies, and then we'll jump right into our discussion. So we'll start with Amy at Swiss Re.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm really glad to be participating in this. I have been with Swiss Re for about 9 years. I'm an HR advisor partner, and I support a lot of our operations units for the Americas, and also work with my counterparts globally as well. We have a lot of consistency between the regions, and then have about 20 years of HR experience in general.
Thanks, Amy. Stephen?
Thanks, Emily. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Stephen Williamson Jr. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leader for Stanley Black Decker Outdoor. I've been with Stanley since June of last year. And in my role, I support all of the business functions and ensuring that all of our colleagues at SPD, particularly within the outdoor organization, has a sense of belonging and that everyone feels included and that they have an equitable work experience and ultimately reach a place of belonging. I'm currently 25, but my professional career began at the age of 12 when I went into ministry, which I did that globally in the Middle East, in Asia, and in Europe as well with clients such as the United States Army. So it's a pleasure to be with you all today.
Thanks, Stephen. Kelly?
Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Butler. I'm calling in today from San Antonio, Texas. So hello around the world, wherever you're joining from. I am the Senior Vice President of Global HR Services for Rackspace Technology. So we're a multi-cloud company located around the world, supporting many name brands that you know, or kind of the behind the scenes of who makes technology and the internet work. And we have a lot going on, as many folks do, with remote and distributed workforces, our well-being initiatives, and of course, a greater focus these days on mental health. And I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about what we're doing.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Mel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mel Goodrich. I am one of the regional vice presidents of human resources for Sentara Healthcare. Sentara Healthcare is a healthcare system encompassing 29,000 team members and 12 hospitals across the Hampton Roads area in Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and others. I am also in my role, I support our HR business partners with corporate strategy for those divisions, as well as work to support our employee relations and our labor relations divisions as well.
Thanks, Mel. All right, let's get right to it. Why don't employers like to talk about the bad? We tend to be really good at saying, hey, you know, Stephen did such a great job with this recent project. This new initiative is going great. Why are employers hesitant to recognize challenges that their employees are having to deal with? And how can we change that behavior? I'm going to throw this one out to anyone who'd like to field this question first.
I'd be happy to share my thoughts on that too. I think that many times they're just uncomfortable. You know, it's not that they're not empathetic, but they don't know how to respond, or they're worried about the emotions that go along with it. There are situations where there are individuals that are not empathetic as well too. They don't have that emotional EQ, and so that's where, as we look for leaders, that needs to be a component as well, of course.
And I think it also comes down to, with some individuals, feeling like if I acknowledge your problem, I might have to do something about it. And I don't know where that line is, right? As leaders and companies traditionally have tried to have this great separation of work and home life. And when we talked about work-life balance, you know, pre-pandemic, that meant there was a time when you were in the office and there was a time you were home with your family, and let's figure out how we allocate those hours. And so they kind of wanted to like make sure they were staying in their lane, so to speak. I think all of that has changed in the last couple of years, and so much of it in some positive ways.
So why should we move in that direction? Why should we be talking about both accomplishments and challenges, maybe even some problems as well? What are we to gain from this in the change? Kelly, I'm going to throw this one back to you. You mentioned employers feeling like they needed to stay in their certain, you know, a specific lane, being relegated only to what took place in the office. What do they have to gain from stepping a little bit beyond that?
So a lot. And I think for us, it has manifested a lot in what I'll call trust. And there's no more lanes. There are people returning to the office, of course, but for many companies, we still have a large portion of the workforce working from home, and everyone's continuing to be in a global environment for our bigger companies as well. And so what that means is, you know, that great unveiling that we all felt 2 years ago, where Not only were many people working from home, but kids were also at home during the early days of COVID. And so, it became commonplace to see, little ones running across the back of the screen. You may still even see a cat jump on my desk today. All of those things became something we all had to deal with at the same time. So we took this giant leapfrog forward of not just this separation of work and home and how do we allocate our time, but truly how do we integrate it and make it work together. And you know what? Sometimes it was really hard. And the silver lining, I guess, if you want to call it that, was we were all experiencing it globally at the same time. So whether you were the CEO or the intern, you were suddenly working from home, and there was a whole lot happening in your personal life as well as your work life. And so being able to acknowledge it and talk about it, get people to share, like, yeah, this is really hard if you have your toddler running around, and you're also trying to, negotiate a supplier contract or whatever your role might be. And it suddenly became this environment, whether it was within our own company or partners or peers or customers, where guess what? We're all human and we all have stuff. We're not just these, perfect facades of professionals that show up for work every day. We're more than that. And sometimes it's really hard. And so seeing that, I think, opened the doors for people to say, hey, how are you? How is it going? And really begin to talk about those other things and create that more sense of an integrated life. And we just saw kind of, for us, we saw an evolution of trust in leadership and trust in our companies and trust in our employees, and knowing we're all in it together. We have the right priorities in mind, but sometimes things are challenging.
Mel, what would you add to that? What's to be gained from talking about both accomplishments and challenges?
I think in healthcare, it's been a little challenging because, we do have a large portion of individuals that, as you said, Kelly, were kind of remote or hybrid situation, but then you had bedside care and you had a pandemic where people were coming in and needing that care. So the volumes were increasing, and yet people were having these same demands of, how am I going to, schools are closed. How am I going to care for my child? What is that going to look like? And so it put us in a space where we needed to be able to meet our employees where they were. We had to understand what their challenges were, both professionally and personally, to be able to really think about what were the benefits that we were offering them, and are the benefits that we have meeting the critical needs that they have based on the changes within the industry, within the environment. So I think having the courage to talk about what is happening gives us the opportunity to explore the benefits of what we can change to meet people and help people where they are, and to say it's okay to not be okay. It is hard. This is difficult. And it's okay to not be okay. And if you have an employer who cares for you, and we want to be able to support you, and you just need to help us understand how we can support you better.
Sounds like the development of incredible empathy across the workforce is what's certainly been made possible by this, coming from all directions, from managers, from rank and file staff, everything. We've talked about the why. Let's talk a little bit more about the how. Stephen, I want to throw this question to you. In what form should acknowledgement of challenges come? Are you using a specific channel or tool, digital or otherwise? What's the setting like? How does it occur?
Thanks, Emily. And firstly, I wanted to make a quick comment to the previous question. I think by and large, the pandemic really thrust us into the future, and have to acknowledge the future of work. At least every study I've read with millennials and Gen Z, they expect more transparency. They expect better work-life balance. They expect to have a voice and a seat at the table when decisions are being made. And with that communication piece, I think COVID just really expedited or exacerbated what we would see in the future of work as it relates to talent anyway. But to answer your question, to the how, I think it really is contingent upon the situation. Firstly, clear and succinct and transparent communication is one of the greatest weapons that any organization can possess. But it also can be a major stumbling block if you do not communicate effectively. And so, for example, just to use my own organization as a brief example, we just recently completed two very large, three acquisitions. And during this process of going through the changes of bringing three very high performing and three very strong organizations together, we've had to ensure that we reach people where they are, and so that they understand the changes that are occurring in real time. And so, for example, our employees that work from home, all of them have laptops, they have email addresses, and we also use a online, almost professional social media platform in which we communicate. But for our makers population, as we refer to them, or our frontline workers, those who work in our plants and our distribution centers, it's not as easy for them to check email addresses if they even have one at all. And so we've had to become innovative with using posters and utilizing QR codes in order to implement surveys or to gain feedback on different initiatives. But that's more so on a macro level. On a micro level, as it relates to people managers and within specific teams, I think it depends upon the situation. So if you have a situation where you have an employee who has done a great job, right, then why not recognize them in front of the entire team? Or if it's something that spans across the organization, acknowledge them at that higher level. Or even on the more difficult side of the coin, right, if you have made a mistake, which once again, and I forget which one of my fellow panelists mentioned that we're all human, having the courage, I think that's the word that Mel used, to communicate, hey, we messed up on this and we want to let you know that we messed up, we apologize, but this is how we're rectifying the situation. And so to make a long story short, I don't think that there is one particular right or wrong way in which to communicate. I think that it is incumbent upon all leaders to communicate in a way that will reach their employees, firstly, not communicating to them through modes that they don't check or that they're not as active on. But then secondly, just acknowledging each other's humanity, giving each other grace, and being upfront about what is happening in real time.
Amy, what would you? Oh,
Emily,
I'm sorry.
some of the things that we tried here that was really successful for us, we kind of took a two-prong approach. We looked at it from a leadership perspective. So we did have a steering committee we called SOAR, which was Solutions, Opportunities, Actions, and Results. And that was where leaders could bring information forward of these were the obstacles we're hearing from our teams. These are the things that our teams are telling us we need to be able to think about and strategize on. And then with our diversity and inclusion and equity chief operating officer, she held a series of what we called safe spaces. And so it really was an opportunity for employees to directly come into that safe space, provide information of what they would like to see and how they might be struggling. And some of them were very vulnerable in that space. And some, we were able to take separate chats to different rooms and kind of talk to them in different virtual rooms and still connect with them. So I think any way that we create that space where we're open and to hearing, people will, build the field, it will come. Engagement surveys, town halls, safe spaces, the SOAR committee were just a couple of the things that we put in place to make sure that voices were heard and people felt supported, regardless of what was happening.
I'd like to get a little bit more detail on that, Mel. So you mentioned safe spaces and town halls. Were those held online? Were they in person? Was it a video? Was it like a Reddit AMA?
The safe spaces was online. Town halls were in person. And so where we had divisions where there were hospitals or medical offices where we could have those conversations in town halls, we did that purposefully. Where people might have been less open to feel vulnerable in a town hall scenario, we had the opportunity for them to join via a WebEx. And then, like I said, the WebEx was that safe space kind of opportunity for people to ask questions, for us to do some thought-provoking panel-like conversations with hundreds of people on a call. What do you think about this? Throw some answers in a chat or speak up if you want to, and just being able to open up some dialogue with our teams in about different topics, to be able to get what are they interested in, what do they want to learn more about, and what can we learn from them to be able to support in a different way.
So when employees were able to bring up things in those virtual or in-person events, I guess more specifically the virtual one, actually we'll say both, was there anonymity granted to people? Could they ask questions anonymously, written, or otherwise? I want to get really specific about the how these things should operate.
Yeah, I think anonymity, no, there wasn't. People, when you're on a chat, just like here, you can see who's saying what. What we were able to do is have some sidebar conversations with people, so you can go into a separate individual room and have a conversation with people if they requested that. Most people were pretty open. Like Stephen said, they were willing to be vulnerable. They were willing to share their stories. They were willing to be transparent. And we got a few of those folks that showed and expressed that courage. And then we got a lot of others that just kind of liked that post. So they would kind of like what was being said, or you'd hear the hashtag retweet kind of thing popping up, so that you knew that that there were several that were feeling similar once somebody expressed what was happening. And if we weren't hearing anything, we would have an opportunity to probe or promote conversation and dialogue to learn.
Right.
Emily, I would like to kind of share, to build on what Mel said, and Mel and Stephen both said that it's important to kind of tailor the approach.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had that situation where we had certain groups that no one would say anything, but we knew that they had feedback to share. And we thought, well, it's a welcoming group. And so we used Slido actually, and it made a huge difference because it was anonymous. And then we've used other platforms where you can, we'll say, type in, some adjectives of how you feel, or, and then you start seeing all these words pop up, and, you can't tell who it's coming from. But, to the point, Mel and Stephen made too, I think we just have to think about, not everyone's going to want to communicate. We're not going to, and there's different subgroups and cultures. I support all of operations. So asset management, finance, legal compliance, they're all so different. And so understanding, and as we know in HR, we don't have trouble, discussing or sharing our thoughts usually. Other groups do. So I think that's something where it's a constant being creative, and trying different things and just sharing, with each other too, what works.
Stephen mentioned this a little bit before about, acknowledging accomplishments publicly. That's pretty easy to do and stand up and say, so-and-so did a really great job with this or that. How should that feedback come in relation to challenges? Do you present them at the same time? Do you have really distinct settings for both of those? I want to keep getting a little bit deeper into the how, because I want viewers to be able to come away with some ideas about ways they can apply. So any examples that you all can offer? Kelly, what have you done at Rackspace?
Yeah, so we do leave a lot up to the local manager, and there's a lot of flexibility within teams. So I'll just give a few examples. We actually use the tool from our sponsor today, Achievers. We've branded it internally as Spotlight, and that allows peer-to-peer recognition. And people can put in whatever they want, but we have some categories for recognition as well. Things like innovation or expertise or customer focus, some things like that. But a lot of times people will put in their, I call it kind of code words, like, if you know the situation, you know what they're talking about, but they're not airing the situation for everyone, but where they say, you really overcame a lot to make this deliverable happen. And they might be, code for a few specific things going on. But we also have things called Fail Fast Friday forums. And we encourage people just it's usually within a team or a function, or if it was a cross-functional project, but they just get together and talk about stuff that went wrong this week. And we really try to get people to talk about it. It's typically, I will admit, typically focused on like the work part of it. But we want people to learn from that. And we don't want people to be covering up mistakes or thinking, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, I can never recover from this, right? We all make mistakes all the time. The more we talk about them and learn from them, the better we get, and the less often we collectively are going to make the same mistakes. And so that's what we are really focused on. Sometimes people bring in, some of their personal things, but the forums really are more about the work part. But it does get that conversation going, and we've been really pleased with how that has gone. And it's open. We're not like, hey, Emily, I think you should be at Fail Fast Friday Forum. It's really voluntary. People first kind of showed up to see like, ooh, who's going to say what? And so we did get those courageous few, and we did tap a few leaders on the shoulder to say, hey, if you go, this really sets the example. Like, we need to have leaders in there saying, yeah, let me tell you about what I did this week and how silly that was. But here's how we recovered and moved on and turned it into something better going forward. Mm-hmm. So those are just a couple of examples from our environment.
That's great. Thank you.
Within Stanley Outdoor, we started implementing something called 20 questions. And so today, coincidentally enough, we reached the 100-day mark of finalizing our acquisitions. And what we do on a pretty regular rhythm is we will gather the senior leaders within the organization, and then our employees will have the opportunity to present whatever question that they may have. And it will range from, hey, I don't know what's going to happen with my bonus since now we are a part of this new organization, to even DE&I questions saying, hey, I feel like some aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion goes against my faith tradition. And we answer every question, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And then in conjunction with that, we even leave time at the end of the session in order to have a live Q&A panel for the leadership as well. And I think that really helps us accomplish a couple of key things. Number one, it ensures that our people are being heard and that their challenges are being heard. As you said, Emily, it's really easy to stand up and say, hey, such and such did a great job. They saved us this much. They created this new product. But as I alluded to earlier, standing up and saying, hey, this is an issue and we understand it's an issue. We do not have an answer for it right now. We're working on it. Or, hey, this is what's being done. That has proven to be quite effective. And then in conjunction with the 20 questions, having post-check surveys where we release 10 to 20 questions every quarter or so before our town halls. And then that allows us to really dig deep into the organization and sometimes find where there are pockets of challenges, if you will, as it relates to employee sentiment or even operational things. All of those venues and those tools really help us continue to stay on top of it. And I think, if I must say so myself, that it is what really keeps morale up and they prevent challenges from coming disasters. Because I think more often than not, something really small can become really big if you do not address it in real time, or if you do not address it candidly or truthfully. And so at least within SBD, those things have been proven to be effective.
Think of it like preventative health care, right?
Exactly. Go to the doctor before the mass, pops up. So.
I want to talk about, I believe, Amy, you brought it up earlier, emotional quotient. And I want to talk about how employers can make sure and managers are equipped to do this. It's one thing to say, hey, we want you to talk about challenges with your workforce. And it's another thing to say, and here's how we would like for you to do that. So you don't go in and say, this is how much money you all cost me this week.
Right.
Because you just don't want that to happen. So how should employers go about making sure their people managers are prepared to do this?
Yeah, I think, what we've done within our organization, and we are in so many different cultures too, but we work globally. So that can be difficult because we have a lot of managers that are in Europe, that have employees in the US. And so there's all these, subcultures again. And so what we've done with our performance, structure and our bonus structure is, and I think a lot of organizations have done this now, is we're tying, the way you behave as well as the goals. So if you meet your goals, but you behaved in a way that was, you were stepping on everyone to get, to where you were achieving those, then you did not meet your goals, and you're not fitting in with the culture. And so really, we, coaching leaders too, we've had leaders coming in from other industries at times that very process oriented, but didn't understand how they were affecting the employees, how all of a sudden they were shutting down, they didn't want to speak up. So it is a real, it is something that, many individuals don't have an understanding of. And so helping them and coaching them on that. And I think too, just, helping the managers understand, why feedback is so important, and, positive or negative. And negative feedback, it doesn't have to be negative, it's constructive, as we always say. But that can be a positive. I always tell employees too, during, your review or anything else, if you can turn that around into something really great, however you handle it, that shows a lot. That shows your behaviors and that you learn from it and so forth. But yeah, I think, there are, I've run into a lot of situations where maybe there's just not that understanding of, how the emotional side and the emotional safety contributes to the success of the organization. Because if you quash the creativity and no one wants to speak up, then, you're just, that's going to affect the bottom line of the business eventually. And your turnover, there's so many, as we know, so many things that factor into that.
Mm-hmm. Is anyone else doing any training of managers in any formal and informal way to have these conversations?
We have specific training, and we do kind of a series each year with different focus areas, let's say. And part of that this year has been leading through challenges and leading through changes. And a part of that series, and it's directed at it's focused on our director and above population. But it's small groups, it's 8 to 10 leaders in a session. They're typically a 4 to 6 week session. They meet once a week, and then there's some little activities to do after. So we try to do it with a light touch. We know everyone's super busy, our leaders are very busy, but they've been nominated to go through these sessions, and it's a recognition of their impact and value. It is not like we need you to fix something, come on over and do this session. It really is kind of it's an honor to be tapped. You get to go to this, you get to talk about it with your team, all of that, but it's small group. It builds some camaraderie across our leadership team, but creates that safer space for a small group of leaders to talk about what things can go wrong. And we have a really great facilitator there who's highly trusted in the organization, known for confidentiality and all of that. And it's a place to come. Let's solve some problems together and figure out how we can change some things. And so that's a big one that we have the focus on empathy and change for this year.
I want to remind everyone in our audience that at about 1:15, we'll take the panelists will take some audience questions. So if anyone has any questions, please pop them in the Q&A, and we'll be going through those here in just a bit. So get your questions in there. Kelly, you mentioned before peer-to-peer recognition. We've been talking about training managers, but the rank and file staff should also be equipped to provide, hooray, you did this, and hey, I need to talk about, there's a challenge. It's especially difficult if they need to raise something to, their manager, something's not going well. It can even be more difficult if it's peer-to-peer. People just aren't really trained to do that. And a lot of people may not feel that they are allowed to. So how are ways that employers can make sure non-people managers, individual contributors feel comfortable raising challenges in the workplace?
So I can start that. I'm sure my co-panelists here have a bunch of great ideas as well. And this sounds very HRE and all of that, but it does work. We suggest when people are providing feedback that, particularly in those situations, like where something is a problem, a challenge, or, whatever, you need to address it and it might be uncomfortable. You give the context and the I liked this, or I learned that, or I got this. And then the, I'll call it loosely, the complaint is put in the form of I wish. I wish next time we could ask everyone for their opinion when we go around the table, instead of just asking Susie or Bob or whatever, if it was just like a conversation that 14 other people were observing, or, whatever it is. But rather than saying like, when you do this, it makes me feel that's, we've all heard that structure, but it sometimes sets people on edge.
Mhm.
So we've been working on this I wish thing for the last couple of years. And it does make a difference when someone comes to you and says, great job, whatever. I wish next time you'd talk more about, I don't know, the context, the milestones, the issues. It sounds less like criticism and feels more like a suggestion on how we can all get better together. So just one small idea.
Sounds like it also keeps the person who's raising the concern actively involved in finding a solution, or
Yep.
I'm the one who saw the problem. I probably have a good workaround or have a good
Right.
solution for next time.
There is probably something that I'm thinking, I wish that were different.
Yeah.
And so rather than just saying like, I hate it when we spend 10 minutes at the beginning of the meeting chit-chatting about whatever, and we don't ever get to the issues log. Instead of that version of what goes through your head, you can say, when we have these meetings, I wish we could just get to it so we can talk about the issues log. And it does keep it kind of forward looking and focus on what could be different, without just pointing out what I don't like.
Yeah. Amy?
Yeah, I was just going to share, a couple years ago, we implemented, and some of you may use this, but it's called My Feedback Tool, and it's in Outlook. And it's been great because as employees, we can ask, request feedback from anyone. So if we're, anything we're doing, it's confidential to us. So no one, HR doesn't have access to it, their manager doesn't have access to it. We can send it to someone, if I wanted to send it to you, Emily, I could say, great job, also, so it's been very good. We're trying to coach the employees that this is a great tool for you because you don't have to share this with anyone. And that we're trying to encourage people to get more in the habit of, even if it's a sentence, don't overthink it either. Just quickly send like, great job, or I want to talk to you more. If it's something to give feedback on, hey, you did great on this. I'd love to talk to you more about, whatever. It doesn't have to be so, I think we overthink things, how do we phrase it? Maybe it's better as a conversation, but at least you want to make a note about it. It's also tied into our performance management system. So if an employee wants to share that feedback, they can, and again, that's where we've kind of coached too, that, okay, I got this feedback. I requested this feedback from this manager. They said I could have done this better. Here's what I did. And so then again, that shows behaviors, so it's really been very beneficial, and it's encouraged, the ease of it has encouraged the employees to feel more comfortable. So we're still working on it, but it's a great tool.
I wonder if any of you have had a harder time, and I don't know, I'd love to know, a harder time getting employees comfortable touting their accomplishments. Do you feel like employees or even managers, just anyone in your organizations, are comfortable saying, not, hey, my coworker did something great? I imagine that's a little bit easier than saying, hey, I did this project, it went really well, and I'm really proud of it. Is that something you all have addressed? Do you find that challenging? Is that something you've considered?
Well, we tie that into the career development conversations. So that's where we really coach, because some people are natural networkers, and some individuals are able to kind of eloquently share feedback. So that's where we talk about it. And sometimes we'll have sessions, with the teams that we support, for the employees, and then also for the managers to kind of explain to them how to coach their employees on these different things as well. And then helping them get exposure, to executives, or to other areas, either via rotations, where they can show their skills. And we have an ambassador program too for one of our groups, where we select individuals that they are looking at any of the issues that are going on, and they're part of the process. So they're working with the teams, but they get that exposure, with the executives of that group. And So there's a lot of different ways, but yeah, that's how we tend to angle it.
Stephen, what about you?
Well, within outdoor, we have 10 cultural attributes, one of them being accountability and results orientation. And through that accountability, I believe we have created an environment that is conducive for those to recognize their accomplishments. And what we've done there, we've really flipped the script, if you will, on that word accountability. Because most of the time, or more often than not, when people hear that, they usually think of a negative connotation. A negative connotation is attached to it. When they think of accountability, it's, oh, I was supposed to do this, I didn't get this done, now I'm going to get in trouble if I didn't do it. But with an outdoor, what we've done is said, well, hey, accountability is, this is, you own this, right? And with that, we are going to be with you every step of the way and acknowledge where you're at in all points of the process. So if you're struggling, it's not, oh, you didn't hit this deadline, but we've created an environment where we're asking, well, how can we help you get this done? Right? Because yes, you're owning this, but we're still one team, we're still organization. And the beautiful thing about that is not only does it accomplish the goal of ensuring that work is done right and holding people accountable from that more traditional perspective, but now it's provided people the grace and space to acknowledge their accomplishments and acknowledge what they've done well. And I think in concert with that, we have a strong leadership team that ensures that they exemplify the culture that we want within outdoor. And so I think because the leadership team will take time to say, hey, had this big project going on, it kicked my butt, but I'm proud, I'm giving myself a pat on the back because we got it done, right? And so then that opens up the door to everyone else. And then it doesn't have that appearance of someone bragging on themselves or being a prima donna or whatever else people might say. But it really exemplifies, and it creates that organic sense of, hey, if I do wrong, I know I will have support from that place of having the help I need. But then if I do well, I will have support there and people will push me from that perspective as well, if that made sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great argument for making sure that there are plenty of times when conversations about accomplishments and challenges are very congruent and they belong together a lot, so that we don't feel so uncomfortable with one or the other. So I think that's great. All right, before we get to Q&A from our audience, I'd really like to know what comes after acknowledgement. We've talked a little bit about it here about, okay, this is how we maybe start talking about a solution, asking the person who raised the question to think about it in terms of bringing a solution to the table. How else are you doing? Are you connecting? We'll use this example. Someone in your workforce raises a challenge. Hey, I don't feel like I'm getting the appropriate amount of support from my manager. Maybe they're not getting feedback. Maybe they're not getting, their manager's not bringing in other people to help them with their jobs. What comes next? Once that person has been able to raise that challenge, then what do you do? Mel?
So I was going to answer the question you asked before the example a little differently. So I'm going to go ahead and answer the first one, because you said, what comes next, right after you've got the information and you've got the ideas and the sharing. And I think it goes back to empowerment. And many of us are on journeys to be high reliable organizations, right? And so it doesn't matter, name badge off. If something's happening where we need to stop a line, if someone is in a surgery or an OR and they're going to take the wrong arm, right? Anyone can stop that surgery in healthcare. And so trying to kind of take that process, that concept of, it doesn't matter, you don't have to be the doctor, you don't have to be the nurse or the anesthesiologist, you can be, anyone in that room. If you recognize that there's something that's going wrong, you are empowered to speak up and to say, something doesn't feel right, something doesn't look like right, and stop the line. And so fostering that, not only from a process around healthcare and procedures, but around how do we take care of each other? How do we care for our caregivers? How do we take care of our teams? And so that empowerment is where it has to go to next. Who's empowered? Who's empowered to make a difference? Who's empowered to stop the line? Who's empowered to come up with an idea? And so we have this other campaign in many of my hospitals where we have this campaign that we call Every Idea Counts. And so if something happens, something happens that didn't quite land right, it was a failure or mistake or something that you didn't feel good about, what's your idea? Like, what's your idea on what we can do differently? Because every idea counts, and it doesn't have to be from specific titles or specific departments or specific areas. Everyone's empowered to kind of provide those ideas. And if your idea is implemented, we give you recognition, public accolations, we give you, you know, the support for bringing that idea forward. And it's the small ideas that get recognized, I think, that get people excited. And give you an example, we were talking to team members, we're like, share all your ideas, like why, you know, if you came into work every day, why would you not be smiling every day? And, you know, there's always those kind of saucy folks. And one person, you know, put in there and said, well, it'd be great if I wasn't getting wet every day, because the sprinkler system comes on right at its shift change. And inevitably, when we're walking across the parking lots, we always get wet because the sprinklers go in the wrong directions. So it would be great if that could be fixed. So that person put in an every idea counts to get the sprinklers fixed. We got them fixed. We were able to give them recognition for that and be able to do something small that made an impact to, you know, who would have thought that would be the big thing that's driving you crazy that day, is that, you know, you're trying to walk in and sprinklers shooting you. Who knew? So it doesn't have to be the earth shattering or groundbreaking things. It could be the 100 little things that make you go, oh man, right? The microwave's not working, you know, the toilet didn't flush. I mean, anything, every idea counts. How can we make this the best place to work? Every idea counts. Tell us what we can do differently, and empower people to bring that forward and show them that when they bring it forward, they're going to get a result from it.
If I can add on to that, which Mel, I loved all of that. That is actually another one of our 10 cultural attributes, empowered to act within outdoor. But we also have a culture committee that we formed as well. And I co-chair that along with the head of talent management. And what that committee has allowed us to do, well, let me back up for a second. First of all, this committee was chosen with a lot of intentionality. We represent almost every function within Stanley Black Decker outdoor, different geographic locations. We have a couple of members who are based outside of the US that represents our international plants and offices as well. But anything that affects the organization at a macro level outside of ops stuff or things like that, it runs through the culture committee. And because we have that diversity of thought, that diversity of gender, sexual orientation, right, socioeconomic class, you name it, it allows us to have that triangulation of thought and really approach different, not only challenges, but also initiatives from a perspective that you do not get from a homogeneous team. And not to go too far on a DE&I bender, but when we think about diversity, a lot of times we think about like gender and race, right? Those are the first two things we think of. But if you have decision makers who are all at a certain management status, then you have a homogeneous team. And there could be some bias that exists because everyone is looking at it from the same perspective. So at least in outdoor, in our first 100 days of existence, the culture committee has been proven to be very effective because it just allows us to view things from so many different angles. I believe we make decisions more quickly, but they're also better informed, and I think they better represent the workforce at large.
Thanks, Stephen. I want to move on to some audience questions in our last 10 minutes. A lot of really good ones. I'm afraid we won't be able to get to all of them, but I'm going to pick out a couple. One of them, I think, Stephen, you'll definitely need to answer this one. It seems like I'm sorry. I've lost it. Here we go. How would you suggest delivering accomplishments and challenges to a blue collar production floor? Helen is asking this in the context of if maybe the majority of your workforce doesn't sit at their computer all day. Stephen, you mentioned QR codes. Is anyone else doing this at other ways of making sure you're delivering these to non-computer based labor?
You can go ahead, Mel. I saw you were shaking your head as well.
No, I loved the QR codes. Yeah, we use QR codes all the time. So we even had a nice video that we did, and we linked it to a QR code that just said thank you. And we went around and passed out lifesavers with the QR code attached to it and handed it to them. And it would have, a video with a message that we want to make sure that they hear. And sometimes that message is this, you're appreciated and thank you. And sometimes the message is, more business centric around, we're doing X, or we're doing great and we're doing this and it's because of you. And so the QR codes I have found from a nursing perspective, they're on the floor, they can't step away, they're not right there at a computer. They can easily scan it with their phone. And if you keep it under like a 4-minute video, you can link videos, you can link surveys, you can link a lot of things to the QRs, and you can do them on postcard size with, some little treats or things that make it easier for them to take the card from you.
And I would say, for plants and other working environments like that, before you even get to that point, I would say it's crucial to go in and see what the culture of the plant is like and see what those employees like. At least in my experience, and Stanley isn't my first time, I also did some work with Canon as well. You will have your corporate culture and then your overall culture for your different worker populations. But by and large, every plant has their own, or distribution center or site has their own unique culture as well. I believe Amy was talking about subcultures. And so I would firstly say, before you move into anything like that, go in and hear what they want, because you could come in and want to plan a big lunch and recognize someone, and that may be fine in your eyes. But then if you go and conduct a simple listening session, or as Mel said, use the QR code and conduct a survey, someone might just want a gift card to the brand new restaurant that opened up a couple of miles up the road, right? Or have an opportunity to have some time off to spend with their new grandchild that was born a couple of months ago. So I will say that, especially in corporate, we all have to be careful about ensuring that we don't try to use a one-size-fits-all thing, which we know scalability is so important, especially when you're dealing with a large organization. I have over 8,100 employees in over 60 countries. I get it. But that is why it's so important to have teamwork and networking, and ensuring that you're delegating as well, to make it more granular, because then the impact is more important. If you make it meaningful to the people that you are serving, right, then it becomes more than just an award or a pat on the back, but it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, giving them that sense of belonging, which there are plenty of studies that have shown that decreases attrition, increases productivity, and several other things.
The next question, how do you support employees with challenges that are particularly sensitive in nature, and really train and support managers around empathetic leadership? We talked about that a little bit. Let's talk about it in the context of topics that are sensitive in nature. Are there specific tactics that have been successful or effective for your teams? Stephen or Amy, either one.
Go ahead, Amy.
Quickly. I think that too, it's such a personalized approach, and you always have to worry, you want to have that consistency, make sure everyone's treated equally. And so, sometimes we'll have employees say, well, why does that individual get this or that? And so it just is really we've had to, work on the environments and the cultures, and if it makes sense, we want to do whatever we can to support those individuals. And for instance, like with COVID, we've been so cautious. I mean, we're back in the office, but we're not making anyone come back in right now. We're telling them that we want them to, and we're definitely going to go to more of a hybrid, but we still understand there's individuals that have infants that can't be vaccinated and things like that. And so that's one thing I've really enjoyed about our organization, is that it's not a one size fits all. So that's a complicated one, but I think you need to just treat everyone fairly. That's what we do, but each instance is something that's probably a tailored approach.
And to add on to that, I've been using this word since I started this position, giving people grace. I think it all boils down to that. In business, we love using a lot of fancy matrices and acronyms and all of that. And hey, I love it too. I'm a current PhD student doing a dissertation on DE&I. But I found that the more that you simplify things, the more effective that you are. I mean, I'll never forget who said it at the beginning of the day, but we are all human beings at the end of the day. And so if you step back, and whether it is your employee or your manager or your president, and you say, okay, if I was on the other side of this Zoom screen, how would I want someone to speak to me, and how would I want them to see my situation? That's the definition of empathy, right? And so I think a lot of times we try to overcomplicate things, right? It's great to provide tools and literature and all of that, but I think when it all boils down to it, you have to create a space where you allow people to be people. And once people can be people, I feel like a lot of those issues, they take care of themselves, because then you start leading with empathy organically. It's not a response, it's a reflex. Which that is the slogan we've developed with DE&I and Outdoor. We're trying to move to being a reflex and not just responsive to certain situations. Sorry, Mel, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what you piggyback on what you said. I think it is about, making sure that I think when people lose their empathy, it's when they are so stretched that they tend to lose sight, right? Because they lose sight of how things are impacting others. Very few people go to work each day and think, oh, I don't care about anybody but myself. But once you get into the routine and you're working, it's very hard it's not hard to get focused on what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish, and lose sight of what's happening with others. And so when you lose that line of sight, you lose your empathy and your compassion. And so some of the things that we're doing to support our leaders is trying to help them just back up. So we've done some block times on calendars to say no meeting zones, right? Like, simple, we're not going to have meetings during this time. We're just going to make sure that you have time to be able to read what you need to read, do what you need to do, talk to who you need to talk to, because we find ourselves in meetings after meetings after meetings. And then for our bedside kind of folks that have gone through a lot during the pandemic, where they were heroes and then not so much, because they were, getting some backlashes around COVID and that type of thing. And we've got brand new nurses that have seen more death in their 2 years of being a nurse than most people have seen in their lifetime. So how do we pick those people up, and how do we make sure that we're empathetic, and that we're not just saying, okay, the bed is empty and we've got 5 people waiting for it, so we're going to give you your next patient. So making sure we've got a pause time between when a patient comes in, if there was a loss or death, before we fill that bed with somebody else, to give the staff time to kind of decompress and be able to give that respectful time. So just thinking about the work and how the work can be in an emotional journey. And then we've also added EAP resources on site. So in a healthcare environment, we thought it was really important that those resources not just be a phone or 1-800 number you could call, which is always appreciated and welcomed, and we still have that, but making sure we have on-site resources for EAP support. So if there is a loss, if there is a tragedy, if there is something that needs to be addressed in real time, there's someone there to talk about it. Because I guess people are not, I believe most people are innately good, and that they go into work trying to be good and trying to take care of each other, especially those that get into the healthcare space. So how do we open their eyes so that they can see what's happening and not just have that tunnel vision, is more of the problem we have to solve.
Well, it's 3:00, so I'm going to have to wrap our conversation. This has been really valuable. I really appreciate your time, Mel, Amy, Kelly, and Stephen. This has been, I think, just a really good conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm going to kick it back to Kaylin from Day One to close us out.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily, and to all of our speakers for such a thoughtful and dynamic conversation. And thank you again to our sponsor, Achievers, and all of you participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website at fromdayone.co and check out more of our upcoming webinars. On Tuesday, March 22nd, we have the hidden impact of positive employee experience and how to enhance it. On Thursday, March 24th, we have the next step to fertility benefits covering all genders. And on Thursday, March 31st, we have ensuring women's career growth and retention in the new work environment. Thanks, everyone, and stay well.